Make no mistake, this is a choice that the government is making. The government is choosing to make people live in poverty at the same time as they give $100 billion a year in handouts to big corporations and the very wealthy. Now, when the Jobseeker payment was doubled last year, we made huge progress in tackling poverty in this country. People spoke of the transformational impact that this had on their lives. They were able to go to the dentist, they were able to buy fresh fruit and vegetables, get their car serviced, buy a family computer and afford essential medication. Things that many of us in this place take for granted, but that you couldn't do on $40 a day. We heard from people who could finally afford essentials like prescription glasses, a fridge, warm jumpers and school supplies for their children. And there were enormous benefits at the community level as well when the rate of Jobseeker payment was increased. The number of people skipping meals dropped by over half to 33%, while the number of people struggling with medical costs dropped similarly by over 40%. And the poverty rate for households whose main source of income is allowances dropped to 26% following the introduction of the coronavirus supplement. But researchers estimate that the poverty rate for these households will skyrocket back up to 85% after this bill is introduced. During the pandemic, we had a window into what it is like for these people to be able to live a normal life, as they were able to all of a sudden be able to buy things like food and essentials and prescription glasses. But now the government is plunging them back into poverty. And that's why I move that the following words be added after education services, and quote, and D, increase the Jobseeker payment to above the poverty line. In a wealthy country like ours, when there's 2 million people who either don't have a job or don't have enough hours of work, and where there's 12 people either without a job or without enough work looking for every job that's available, and when there's 60 people on unemployment benefits for every one entry-level job that is available, no one should be living in poverty. We should be able to keep people above the poverty line while they look for work, and especially while this country recovers from the pandemic and we rebuild. The jobs that the government says that people need to get just aren't there. They're just not there at the moment. And that's especially the case in places like my electorate of Melbourne, where so many of the industries that employ people, like hospitality, like events, like tourism, are now still not able to get back on their feet because we're still dealing with a pandemic and they're subject to social distancing restrictions. The government just does not seem to get that we are still dealing with the virus and still dealing with the economic consequences of it, and the jobs have not bounced back. But what is the government doing? The government is punishing people for not finding jobs that aren't there. That's what this government is doing. The government is saying, even though we've got enough money to give $100 billion in handout to big corporations, even though we think that billionaires deserve a tax cut and will rip $300 billion out of the budget with the Labor Party's help to make sure that we can't fund schools and hospitals as well as we would like, even despite all of that largesse that's available for big corporations and billionaires, I'm sorry, we can't lift you out of poverty in the middle of a pandemic. It is incredibly cruel. It is incredibly cruel, and that's why I'm moving the amendment to increase Jobseeker payment above the poverty line. We can do it. We did it during the pandemic, the worst of the pandemic, and we can do it now as we recover from the pandemic and into the future. Because when you are living on so low as the $44 a day that the government is proposing, what they don't understand is that you not only go without many of the essentials, you not only have to skip meals, you not only have to have those difficult conversations with your kids about why they can't go on excursions or do the things that other kids are doing, but it's actually a barrier to finding work, because it means you don't have the money to go on that extra training course. You don't have the money to go and buy some nice new clothes. You don't have the money to get a haircut. Being on $40 or now $44 a day means you spend all your time just struggling to survive. It's not a living, it is just barely surviving. And then to make matters worse, the government comes along and says, we're going to introduce a hotline, a Jobseeker hotline, where you're going to be able to dob people in, and as you're struggling just to survive and as you're looking for jobs that aren't there, you now have the added weight hanging over you of an employment service provider who makes money out of this whole industry, which should be, this privatisation should be completely unwound, and we should go back to having a public-centred approach to employment service provision. But these people who make money, many of them who make money out of this, now will have potentially, now have the ability to put a black mark against someone's name and say, oh, no, they didn't take a job that we reckon they were suitable for. And employers can do it too. Employers are able to dob people in according to this new government hotline. So if you're a young woman who goes for a job at a place and you come out of it feeling like, I don't trust that man who's going to employ me, he's creepy and he's sleazy, and I don't want to be working under him. And then you turn around and you say, I'm not going to accept that job. You can get a black mark put against your name and potentially have your payments suspended. People should have the right, after they've met their employer face to face, to say, no, actually, this job isn't going to work out for me, and I've got some very good reasons why. But no, this government's punishing them for even doing that. The mutual obligation requirements that are being imposed in this bill as well are going to mean that from July, people will be forced to apply for up to 20 jobs a month in the middle of a recession, and they're going to be required to resume face-to-face appointments with job-active providers, even while social distancing restrictions are in place in many places around this country. And again, this speaks volumes of the government's approach. And the government's approach is to punch down and to blame people for not finding jobs that aren't there. But there's a different way. If we make the billionaires and the big corporations pay their fair share of tax, then we can afford to ensure that no one is living in poverty in this country, and that we invest in the kind of job-creating, nation-building projects that will set ourselves up for the future, deliver something of lasting benefit to Australia, and get us back to full employment. Instead of handing out $1 billion a year to big corporations, including their donors, the government could invest some of that money in projects like getting Australia running on 100% renewable, restoring our environment, expanding free education. That would create jobs. So the government could actually do things right now through its investment that would create jobs. But instead, the government has a trickle-down approach to the recovery. A trickle-down approach to the recovery that says we'll force people to live in poverty, but we'll give $100 billion a year to big corporations and the very wealthy, and hope that they choose to use some of it to employ people. Well, no. High unemployment is a choice this government is making. High unemployment is a choice this government is making. This government is choosing to keep people out of work, because what it could do with that $100 billion instead is take it, invest it in projects that will deliver lasting benefit for the whole of Australia for decades to come, and would give people meaningful work, a meaningful job for everyone who wants it. We could get back to full employment in this country if we wanted to. That's what they did in the US after the Great Depression. They invested, and as a result, they've got a national park system that is still used to this day. They have transportation networks that are still used to this day. They built amazing buildings. They created incredible works of culture. Because instead of giving money to the same people who helped cause the crisis, they put money into direct job creation. And that's what the government needs to do here. That is how you create the jobs for people. And that is how you could go to every person in this country and say, we can guarantee you a job working on one of these nation-building, planet-saving projects. Look at our natural environment. Look at how devastated it is, especially after last year's bushfires. Look how much work needs to be done in regional and rural areas in particular about restoring our environment and getting it back to good health. That is work that could create jobs. Look at our aged care sector and the scandals that we've seen there, and the fact that the number one recommendation of the Royal Commissioners is to invest in the workforce and lift the workforce. We could invest in our aged care sector so that there's more nurses and more attendants and more other staff working in our aged care sector, and that would create jobs. But this idea from the government that instead we're going to just keep giving more money to the billionaires and big corporations and hope it will get better is a trickle-down fantasy. And for so long as the government is refusing to offer people those decent jobs, they've got no right to complain about the unemployment rates. But what we should do in this country is all agree on a single principle, that in a wealthy country like Australia, no one should be living in poverty.